Stop everything, because history did not begin in a lab, or a university, or a billion-dollar research center. It began in a quiet public library with a 10-year-old black boy whose feet did not touch the floor when he sat in the chair. His name was Eli Carter, and the question he asked that afternoon was one that had defeated PhDs for decades. Eli was not supposed to be there. The library sat between two old brick buildings on the east side of the city, a place most people passed without noticing. Eli came every day after school because his grandmother worked late, and the library was warm, quiet, and safe. He loved puzzles. Not video games, not cartoons, puzzles, numbers especially. They made sense to him when nothing else did. That day, Eli sat at a long wooden table, surrounded by books far too heavy for his small hands. Titles about mathematics, physics, and something called unsolved problems. Words most adults avoided. Across the room, a flyer was taped to a bulletin board. Open problem lecture. Unsolved for 40 years. Sponsored by the State University. Eli stared at it. 40 years felt longer than forever. A group of adults stood nearby, arguing softly. One wore a suit. Another had glasses hanging from a chain. A woman shook her head and said, "If people with doctorates can't crack it, no one can." Eli frowned. He pulled one of the books closer and read about the problem, slowly, carefully, twice. It was a mathematical pattern that appeared simple, but collapsed every theory built around it. Researchers had published papers. Careers had ended. Millions of dollars had been spent. Eli did not know any of that. He only saw something that felt wrong. "That part doesn't have to repeat," he whispered to himself. "It's just assumed." He grabbed a pencil. What followed was not genius lightning or magical inspiration. It was quiet thinking, careful steps, erasing, trying again. Time passed. The sun lowered. At some point, the arguing adults stopped talking. They were staring at him. A librarian approached slowly. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "those books are very advanced." Eli looked up, eyes wide but calm. "I know, but I think they skipped something." She smiled politely, the way adults do when humoring children. "What did they skip?" Eli turned the notebook around. "I think they forgot to check what happens when the sequence breaks before the loop finishes." The room went silent, because written on that page was something no one had seen before, and Eli Carter had no idea that in that moment, history had already changed. It felt heavy. 3 adults moved closer to the table, not fast. Careful, like they were afraid the page might vanish if they blinked. A man with gray hair leaned in first. His finger hovered above Eli's notebook, but he did not touch it. "Where did you see this step?" he asked. "I didn't," Eli said. "I tried it both ways. This way doesn't collapse." The woman with glasses took the chair beside him. She read the page once, then again. Her mouth opened, then closed. "That shortcut?" she said softly. No one questioned that shortcut. The third man shook his head. "Because it was proven stable." Eli looked confused. "It's stable only if you assume the loop finishes. But if it breaks early, the pattern flips." The adults looked at each other. Not excitement, not joy, fear. Because if Eli was right, decades of work were not wrong exactly. They were incomplete. The librarian cleared her throat. "Should I call the university?" she asked. The gray-haired man nodded slowly. "Yes, now." Within an hour, the small library felt different. Phones rang. Chairs moved. People whispered. Someone printed pages from Eli's notes and spread them across the table like fragile glass. Eli sat still, legs swinging, watching. "Did I mess up?" he asked. The woman turned to him. Her eyes were wet. "No," she said. "You may have fixed something we could not." When the professor from the university arrived, he did not smile. He did not scoff. He read. He sat down. He read again. Then he asked a question no one expected. "Who taught you this way of thinking?" Eli shrugged. "My grandma says if something doesn't work, it's okay to ask why twice." The professor closed his eyes. Outside, rain began to fall. Inside that library, the first crack appeared in a wall that had stood for 40 years. By the next morning, the library was locked. Not closed, guarded. Eli arrived with his grandmother, confused to see 2 security officers at the door and a handwritten sign taped to the glass. Private academic review in progress. His grandmother squeezed his hand.
What did you do, baby? She whispered.
I don't know, Eli said honestly. Inside, the same wooden table was gone. In its place stood whiteboards, laptops, and stacks of printed papers covered in red ink. People spoke in low, urgent voices. Some had flown in overnight. A woman with a badge knelt in front of Eli. Hi, Eli. I'm Dr. Alvarez. We're going to ask you some questions. You can say you're tired any time. Eli nodded. They did not ask him to prove anything at first. They asked him how he thought. Silence followed. Then the vote. Unanimous. The assumption was officially withdrawn. In that moment, a problem that had survived 40 years of intelligence, funding, and pride collapsed because a child was willing to ask a simple question. Later that afternoon, Eli was called to the principal's office. His stomach twisted. He thought he was in trouble. Instead, he found his grandmother standing there, eyes shining, hands shaking. They want to meet you, she said. All of them. At the press conference, Eli stood on a small platform, feet dangling, microphone too tall. Flashing lights filled the room. Reporters leaned forward. A voice asked, Eli, how does it feel to solve something experts could not? Eli thought for a moment. I don't think they couldn't, he said. I think they were busy protecting the answer they already had. The room went quiet. That sentence would be quoted around the world, not because it was clever, but because it was true. Eli did not become famous overnight. The world tried to turn him into a symbol, a prodigy, a miracle, a headline. But Eli stayed a child. He still went to the library after school, still helped his grandmother carry groceries, still wrote his numbers in pencil and erased them without regret. What changed was the door. Universities rewrote courses, journals issued corrections, grants were redirected, and quietly, deeply, something shifted in how knowledge was treated. People began asking younger voices to speak. At a ceremony months later, Eli stood in a suit borrowed from a neighbor. The audience rose to their feet. He looked uncomfortable. A scientist leaned down and said, "You reminded us why we started." Eli shook his head. I just didn't want the answer to lie. Years later, textbooks would reference the Carter brake condition. Students would learn it without knowing the boy who first saw it while his feet swung above the floor. But some would know. Because every time a teacher said, "Ask again," a door stayed open. Eli Carter did not just solve a problem. He reminded the world that truth does not care about age, race, or titles. It only asks to be seen.